In this video, we're heading to Bowling Green, Kentucky for the Wally Parks Nostalgia Nationals presented by Holley. Now, this event used to be called the Hot Rod Reunion, and quite frankly, I'm probably still going to be calling it the Hot Rod Reunion because I have a ton of great memories at this event. Me and my dad have been coming since 2008. It's always on Father's Day weekend, and it's all things nostalgia drag racing. Gassers, funny cars, dragsters, super stock cars, altered wheelbase cars, a little bit of everything here, plus a huge car show. And I'm going to bring you some of my favorite finds on the property, tons of historical cars from all different generations of drag racing. Stick around to the end of the video and see some drag racing action from Thursday's qualifying sessions. The first place that my dad and I go is the swap meet. There's always a bunch of great vintage speed parts like magnesium wheels, fuel injection systems, cool scoops, things like that. And in this case, we ran across this really cool front engine dragster. And this isn't just a tribute car or something somebody pieced together in their backyard. This is a car with history. As I look further into the information on this car, I see that it's a junior fuel car, which means it ran on nitromethane, but it was not supercharged. So back in the 60s, these junior fuel cars were very lightweight. That's why this thing's a little shorter than what you'd normally see on a mid-60s front-engine dragster. And they also ran really small cubic inch engines. So this one has a 301 cubic inch engine, 3-speed transmission, and an Oldsmobile rear end. Pretty popular setup back in the day for this type of car. Now they're only asking $10,000 for this car, which seems like a deal for a car with history. It's got a bunch of cool pieces on it, including the Algon fuel injection system. And it said on the information that this car was actually sponsored by Algon. So really neat to see this thing is mostly complete. It's got a lot of history, and you could actually just clean this thing up and make it a very presentable piece in a museum, or maybe even do a little bit of work and make it a cackle car. This thing has tons of potential for only 10 grand. Another piece in the swap meet is this Vega funny car. Now, of course, the first things I notice are the magnesium wheels. This thing's got a killer set of Halbrand magnesium spindle mount wheels on the front and 16-inch rears. I mean, that's probably 5 grand worth of wheels and tires right there. But bodies up on this thing, you can see that everything on this car is in pretty good shape. The suspension looks to be in good shape. The chassis itself looks good. This thing is actually kind of up to date as far as some of the roll cage and things like that. This is not just an old wore out chassis. This is something you could actually put an engine in and go racing with. But again, I looked over on the other side and the price tag's there, asking $11,000, delivery available. That seems like a deal on this thing. I mean, again, 5 grand worth of wheels, the chassis itself is in really good shape. And even though the body looks kind of rough, you could straighten this thing up and paint it. The tin work's all there. You could put some fresh Lexan in there and have a very presentable early 70s Vega funny car. After we went through the swap meet, we made our way into the drag racing pits, which is also another place to find some good deals. Some guys will just have a little table with some parts sitting out there. You know, they're not serious swap meters or anything like that. They're just trying to get rid of some of their used parts. You can find some really good deals. Anyway, this was the first thing that I saw in the pits that really got my attention. This is a chassis research front engine dragster. And you can see it's got magnesium spindle mount wheels on the front with old crusty Goodyear front runner tires. You can see it's got a small block Chevy, mechanical fuel injection, magneto. You got a cable drive tack up on the dash, I guess you could call it up there. It's got the chassis research dash plate, the chassis research aluminum steering wheel, and you can see those M&H Racemaster tires. Those things are looking good. Not something you'd want to race on, but they definitely look the part. It's got cool zoomy headers with the little caps over the top. But look at this tow vehicle. This is a Ford Falcon van. Now, a lot of people might refer to this as an Econoline, which it is, but you can see right there the Falcon badges. This thing is so cool. It's got some cool patina and rust, little two-tone paint job, plenty of racing decals on the windows, Krager SS wheels, just the perfect combination here with the tow vehicle, the little single axle trailer, and one of the coolest old school dragsters I've ever seen. Oh, and you got to look at this engine mount and transmission mount on this thing. Super simple, just flat plate on the engine mount, bolts into a little tab, and then on the back where the mid plate would be on a modern race car, they've got this super cool little simple bracket that bolts to the back of the block, and then look, it's held to the frame with a hose clamp. One of my favorite classes that they run at this deal is called Modified Production. And there's a bunch of rules to it, but my favorite rule is that they have to have a manual transmission. And you'll see AMC power under the hood of this Rambler. It's got a really rare cross ram intake, 2 4s, and look at this old school paint. Lots of cool lettering, lots of cool lines, gold leaf on the Rumbler lettering there on the door, lots of old school decals and sponsorship deals there. Very cool. And you look in the back, I mean, this is a pretty modernized race car. And you can see this car's actually entered in multiple classes. Modified Production, it was also running in the 1050 Hot Rod class, and it looked like it was also running Nostalgia Superstock. One really cool thing about this event is they always have one section of the pits dedicated to these Cacklefest cars. Now these cars are typically restored dragsters and funny cars, and they're not cars that you'd actually go out and race, but they are functional in that they can crank up. They will almost always have nitromethane in the tank, and they go out on Saturday night as kind of the finale for this event. And they go out, line up on the track just as the sun's going down, and they crank all these things up at the same time, make a lot of noise, fire coming out of the pipes. It's a really cool experience because there's not many events where you get to see this many cars out there on the track making noise at the same time. So on this row of cars, there's a lot of history. So I wanted to make a pass through here and show you guys some of these cars. I wasn't able to show every single one of them, but I picked out a few highlights here, and we're going to talk about some of these cars as I make my way through. This was a really cool collection of Top Fuel dragsters. Now, a couple of these cars were based out of West Virginia, which seems like an unusual place for a professional race team to be based out of, but there was a lot of races up in the Northeast that they had access to. They had access to a lot of the races in Ohio, and not terribly far away from Indianapolis. So I guess West Virginia was pretty good after all. But these cars were restored to very high standards. You can see the paint, the chrome, everything on these cars are immaculate. Definitely a nice touch with the old beer cans covering up the header pipes. That was a thing they did back in the day. You see they're tied together with a chain, and they actually used authentic old beer cans like Schlitz and Old Milwaukee. I mean, that's pretty authentic. And the car on the end here is the Hundley and Boggs 1967 championship car. Now this thing's been restored beautifully. Look inside and out, it is immaculate. The engine looks like it's never even been run before, but this thing still makes noise. It still puts on a show, even though it's not going down the drag strip anymore. Now this is the Fox and Hull's Bellwether Automotive Special. It was a Top Fuel dragster that ran in the late 60s and early 70s. It had a Woody Gilmore chassis and a body by Tom Hanna, and it was owned and tuned by Don Fox. This car raced in the Midwest in NHRA Division III, and what you're seeing here is a recreation of this car's 1969 configuration. Now here's a really cool Anglia gasser that was sitting in the pits. This belongs to Chuck Williams, and he's looking to find any kind of information on this thing. You can see a picture of it taped to the windshield of what it used to look like back in the day. And it says Super 6 on the door. This was actually an H-gas car, had an inline 6-cylinder engine in it. And you can see just a little bit of remnants of that Super 6 lettering still on the door. Pretty wild that you can just barely make it out. I mean, just barely. But this is a really solid car. The frame and everything's good. You can see he's got a small block Chevy with fuel injection. You can see he's got a small block Chevy with fuel injection mocked up in there. But he's still kind of unsure on the direction as far as the build. But you can see this thing has a ton of great parts already in place on it. Back here in the back, this thing's got a killer suspension setup. I'll show you more details on that. This has got quarter elliptical leaf springs, ladder bars with tons of adjustment, a Watts link. I mean, this was high-tech stuff for back in the day. You can see it's got a roll cage in it already. I mean, this thing is pretty far along when it comes to an old drag car like this. Put some floor pans in this thing, brace it up a little bit better, and it's going to be ready for whatever engine he throws at it. So this is a really neat piece. This is something I'm going to be researching because I just love trying to find old pictures of old drag cars. I believe this car ran in Ohio. Not real sure exactly what all tracks it ran at, but it gives me a little bit of information to start the research process. I think this is going to be a great project. It looks like a good start, and Chuck will definitely make this thing right. Speaking of right, this is Chuck Williams' dragster that he built a couple years back. Now this thing is killer. Small block Chevy with a blower, a 2-port Hilburn setup on there. Really cool, and this thing makes a bunch of noise too. But check out the trailer. And look, he's towing it with what looks to be like a 47 Chevrolet Coupe. Super cool combination. Now check out this Corvette funny car. This is Bruce Larson's USA 1 1979 Corvette, and this thing is unrestored. Back in the day, this thing ran $599 at 243 miles per hour. This was a very competitive car back in the day, and it's still looking good even though it hasn't been restored. It's still got its 484 cubic inch Hemi with Enderley fuel injection and Mooneyham supercharger, and it's running on 80% nitromethane. Now it doesn't get much cooler than this. This was early days of funny car, right when the one-piece fiberglass body became a thing. But look at this car. This has got burnt paint right where the headers are. This thing has got so many great details on it that are original. Check out the paint, check out the Lexan that's tinted. I mean, this thing is killer. The old sign painting and lettering on this thing is unbelievable. And you can see this thing still shines up good. It's still got the right look. It's got a set of Halbrand wheels on it, M&H slicks. And check out that patina on the magnesium, turning back gray and chalky. That's just how it does. The old school headers. I mean, this thing is authentic from front to back. It's not something you'd want to go out there and take a chance on tearing up on the racetrack because it's so original. It's so cool. This thing has got all the right stuff. Again, just look at that paint. It's starting to come apart a little bit, but all of the important details are there. The old striping, all of this amazing work is still intact. This is a piece of drag racing history. Now here's another Dick Harrell funny car. This one a couple years later, but very nicely restored. Where the other car was preserved, this one, you can see the paint is immaculate, the candy apple red, the striping, airbrush work, it is beautiful. Polished magnesium wheels, you can see just so many great details. They've got a little driver mocked up in there that's not actually a real person, but just so cool. This car is restored to show car levels, and it got a ton of attention all weekend long, along with the Dick Harrell ramp truck. This is a 1970 C30, and this thing is just as nice as the funny cars. It is set up exactly like they had it back in the day with the old slicks on the roof. This is a perfect combination. Here's another cool frontage and dragster. Now this one's a really short wheelbase. It's got an early Hemi. Check out all these old school blower pieces. 4-port injection with a super cool looking scoop with custom paint on it. So many cool pieces on this engine, including that Iskandarian belt tensioner. That's a rare piece. And this thing is just restored to perfection. And you can see the paint and lettering is super simple, but also very clean, nicely done. The seating is very minimal. Not a whole lot going on the inside of this one. And you can see this car has kind of a wild roll bar setup where it kind of swells out there at the top, but lots of authentic details here. It's got steel wheels and pie crust slicks on it. Again, you can see right there the short wheelbase. This thing was probably a handful. And got the big parachute on the back. As we look inside, you'll see the ring where you pull the chute. It's got the old butterfly wheel. Everything in here looks to be authentic and really goes along with the early 60s look and feel of this old school dragster. Here's another short wheelbase front engine dragster. Now this is a chassis research frame. You can see it's got a blown and injected small block Chevy, magnesium wheels on it. This thing is set up nice. It's owned by Dave Huber out of the Louisville, Kentucky area. He's a hot rodder and an old school drag racer and has a cool collection of old school cars. This is the Cox and Amos AA dragster, and it's restored in its 1975 configuration. That's when it was last raced. It was driven by Bob Amos, and you can see it's got a Chrysler Hemi that's been bored and de-stroked to 388 cubic inches. It's got a magnesium supercharger on it and a Hillborn shotgun style injector on it. This car's got a lot of cool history right here in Tennessee. Now here's a really cool pair of cars that are both powered by small cubic inch Dodge Hemis. Now the first is a C dragster, and this chassis has got a lot of history, but is now owned by Jim Mize, and he is an early small Hemi guru. And you can see this thing has got Hillborn fuel injection on it. This thing is set up as authentic as it can possibly be, and then sitting next to it is his Anglia, which is beyond authentic. This is the real deal. This is not a restoration. This is the old paint that was on this car back in the early 70s. It's still there. This engine setup, the transmission, the rear end, everything on this car is functional. They actually get out and race this car, and it's just like it was in the early 70s. The Mize family are full-blown drag racers. Jim started racing in the late 50s. His sons Scott and Jeff have been involved for many, many years, and his granddaughter Bailey is at the drag strip more than anybody that I know. Now this is where the term funny car came from. These early altered wheelbase cars just looked funny. The rear axle was pushed forward, the front axle was pushed forward, but these are the predecessors to the flip-top funny cars that came out just a couple years later. Now this is a wild one. This one has no historical value, but it's super cool and I figured you guys would want to see it. This is a Divco milk truck and it's powered by a twin-turbo big block Chevy. This thing is top notch front to back. I mean, it's got killer suspension. You can see the big lock wheels on the back. It sits just right, and when you look inside, it's got hardwood flooring. It's got a second row of seats. I mean, this thing is set up really cool. And this thing went out there and ran 11 O's out in the heat of the day. And I saw that it had drag week and sick week stickers on it, meaning that this thing not only goes fast, but also drives great distances and can be streetable and survive, you know, road trips or whatever. So really cool piece. I enjoyed being able to see this mixed in with all the other historic race cars. They also had a Nostalgia Pro Stock class going, which was really cool. Most of the entries were like 80s cars, Camaros and Trans Ams and things like that, but this early Vega is really cool. You can see it's got a Tubby Gallop tag here on the dash. This is a pro-built, pro stock car. Everything about this thing looks proper and it looks like it came straight out of the 70s. So I was walking through the staging lanes and I couldn't help but stop and look at this Nova. This thing's got the perfect 70s and 80s stripe job. It's got killer lettering, and just look at the details on this thing, and it survived lots of years on the drag strip. You can see that this thing's been around a long time. Driver Ray Smith retired, but it looks like this car is still in the Smith family. Let's take a look in here. You can see Super Racing Ray lettered on the dashboard. Lots of cool history with this thing, lots of cool memories for the Smith family. Now here's something I've never seen before at the Hot Rod Reunion. This was a collection of vintage drag bikes that were brought in from all over the country. Lots of twin engine bikes with Triumph engines. I mean, just unbelievable craftsmanship on these things and unbelievable preservation. These things were period correct from front to back. I mean, they are awesome pieces of drag racing history, but they're often forgotten because drag bikes just didn't get a whole lot of credit back in the day. And some of these things have history dating way back. We're talking 50s and 60s. Some of them that I'm showing you here came from the 70s and 80s, but most of this stuff has like 50 plus years of serious history. And without a doubt, the rarest bikes on the property are these Vincent powered motorcycles. These V-twin engines, these were like the Ferrari of motorcycles back in the day. And there were two drag bikes with Vincent engines. This blue one, this thing has a supercharger on it. Absolutely insane. I mean, I don't know what times these bikes ran back in the day, but they're so cool to look at. So many cool details, low slung. I mean, they are just killer looking bikes. And I'm glad they brought these things together. They actually had some exhibition bikes on the property as well. A really cool addition to the event that kind of came along with the name change. The Hot Rod Reunion turned into the Wally Parks Nostalgia Nationals presented by Holley. And, you know, I'm not a huge fan of the name change, but I am a fan of bringing in things like this. Here's a combo the Ford guys will like, a Ford F-250 Ranger pulling a 1969 Mustang Fastback. Now this is the Platt and Payne Mustang run by Hubert Platt back in the day. This thing has been restored beautifully. Check out that paint, the lettering, the decals. And now for the Mopar guys, we've got a Plymouth Duster Pro Stock car that was run by Reed Winsnett back in the day. This car is restored to absolute perfection. Look at the custom paint work, the custom lettering, the decals, the Firestone Drag 500 slicks. They don't make those anymore. Those are original. This is just so much originality right here from the early 70s. And here we've got another Mopar. This is a 1967 Plymouth Belvedere. This is a 426 Hemi with a 4-speed. This was Judy Lilly's car, a famous Mopar drag racer from back in the 60s and 70s. She campaigned it for only one season, 1967, a brand new car, but it was sold and kind of lost for lots of years and ended up coming back. It was in a Hot Rod magazine ad back in the day when they had black and white classifieds in the back of the book, and this thing was bought and then eventually restored to the condition you see here. The Grand Marshal for the Wally Parks Nostalgia Nationals presented by Holley was Don Garlitz, and he brought his Swamp Rat 12A. This is one of many Swamp Rat cars and historic drag cars that he owns and typically displays in his museum in Ocala, Florida, but he brought this one out to be amongst all the other historic cars in Bowling Green. Here's another really cool combination. We've got a yellow and white 57 Chevrolet Nomad. Check out that tow bar. Hooked up to the Nomad, hooked up to the 57 behind it. You'll see it has a custom tube grill, fender well headers, you can see those poking out, 2 4s on a small block Chevy. This car ran in junior stock, which was pretty common in the late 60s and very early 70s. This car actually ran in H stock automatic, which put it in that junior stock eliminator. But this thing is a true survivor. And you can see on the door it says Chambers Chomper, and that comes from the driver's name, Larry Chambers. He was based out of the Memphis, Tennessee area, so he raced at tracks like Lakeland International Raceway, Carlisle Drag Strip in Arkansas, Hall's Drag Strip. He even raced at Bristol, which was kind of a long haul, all the way across the state of Tennessee, and raced at the U.S. Nationals in Indy. This car was raced from 1965 through 1969, and it was a class champion in 1968. And according to the information, it's a 283 cubic inch engine, 2 4s of course, and a Power Glide transmission built by Coleman and Taylor, which was a Memphis-based transmission place. And in the trunk, you'll see lots of cool pictures and information and old passes and trophies and things like that of when this thing was running back in the day. Here's another old survivor. I guess you could say that this thing has survived. It's a little rough around the edges. You can see the hood has seen better days. It's got a lot of Bondo in it and obviously had some kind of scoop on it back in the day. But this is a really neat car. It looks like about a 64 or 5 Plymouth Belvedere. This thing's got old school paint on it, buzzard bait on the doors, and the owner is looking for information on this car. You can see they've patched up the quarter panels. It's got Man Speed Specialties lettered on the quarter panel, and see those flames and the custom striping and everything. This is a pretty wild looking car for back in the day. An old school AHRA decal there, and then right here it says paint by Kessler Brothers. Another nice little detail there. I don't know anything about this car, but it does make me want to look for old pictures, look for information, try to dig up anything to try to help this guy out, because this is obviously a piece of history. Even though it's a little rougher than most, it's still got the bones of a really great historic drag car. Now we've got another old Anglia. This one's got a blown small block Chevy in it with 2 4s. Pretty cool looking setup there, definitely full of engine. You can see that they've recessed the firewall way back, and this one's got a few modern pieces on it. You'll see an aluminum radiator, but this thing does have some history. You can see by the flaking paint, and you can also see the old school Krager front runners and old bi-sply tires. And let's take a look inside. That's where we really see some history. It's got a 3-point roll bar wrapped up tight. It's got an old high back bucket seat in there. I like the old helmet hanging there too. Some aluminum work in here. They've obviously moved the steering around to set the driver further back because the engine set back. It looks like it's got wider than stock fenders on the back of it, but this thing obviously has some cool history going back to the 60s and 70s. So that does it for my coverage from the Wally Parks Nostalgia Nationals presented by Holley, previously known as the NHRA Hot Rod Reunion. This event is awesome. I want to go to it every year, but sometimes I can't because of work travels and things like that. But it is an awesome event to go to. It's always on Father's Day weekend, and I'll leave you with some awesome drag racing clips from different classes throughout the day, including Nostalgia Top Fuel and a few clips of funny cars as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and definitely if you like old school drag racing, you gotta check this event out.